The OpenAI CEO Sam Altman met Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. He is on a worldwide tour to discuss the future of AI in India and its downsides as well. Altman talked about his meeting with Modi while attending an event at IIIT Delhi. He said that the Prime Minister showed a lot of enthusiasm and thoughtfulness towards artificial intelligence. Remember, Sam Altman is the brains behind ChatGPT. Now, Prime Minister Modi too wrote about the potential of artificial intelligence in India's tech ecosystem, calling it vast, specifically among the youth. He said, and I quote, "We welcome all collaborations that can accelerate our digital transformation for empowering our citizens." And that, of course, was the tweet put out by Prime Minister Modi. It's a big story. It's a story about India's tryst with artificial intelligence, where we are, where we are headed in about a year's time from now. All that will be discussed on this show. With me at this point in time in the studio, my colleagues Krishnakumar. Also with me is Amit, Ranjan. Joining us is also Shashi Shekhar Vempati, who's an expert all things AI. But before I go to Mr. Vempati, let me quickly come to Krishna first to understand what's actually happening, Krishna. We see Sam Altman in India, but he's also meeting world leaders. What is he trying to achieve?
He is essentially on a 5-nation trip that includes Jordan, Qatar, the UAE, India, and South Korea. So after India, he will be heading off to South Korea. He tweeted about the fact that he's going to be on this 5-nation tour. So in a sense, it's incredible that as part of his India pit stop in this journey, he met no less than the Prime Minister of the country, Prime Minister Modi, and he's even said that the Prime Minister seemed to be extremely knowledgeable and enthusiastic about artificial intelligence and the use of artificial intelligence. This is a time when India is creating its Digital India framework to replace the IT Act. It's an important time for India as it goes towards its vision of creating Digital India. So Sam Altman in India on the biggest piece of futuristic technology that we're all playing with these days, and that's called artificial intelligence, and especially ChatGPT. In fact, he asked the Prime Minister, how come so many Indians took to ChatGPT faster and in more greater numbers than any other country? And apparently, Mr. Modi gave a very interesting answer. So we're here to understand what was the answer that the Prime Minister gave Sam Altman. So that's the kind of conversation that went on between Sam Altman and the Prime Minister. Is part of that 5-nation trip. And in a sense, they say that the idea is that he wants an international framework, an international body to govern and regulate artificial intelligence, sort of like a United Nations for artificial intelligence. That's what he wants to set up. That's the big picture as far as Sam Altman's globe trotting is concerned.
Right, and he's raised, in fact, fears around AI, what AI can potentially do, the downsides of AI. We've all talked about how AI is extremely helpful, is accelerating growth, transforming, digital ecosystem, not just here in India, but also worldwide. But the downsides, of course, of AI, and we will discuss that. But I want to first understand from you, Mr. Vempati, at this point in time, before I go to my colleague Amit here, what exactly are we hoping to achieve through this collaboration with OpenAI, if at all there's going to be a collaboration?
See, OpenAI is clearly way ahead of all the other tech companies in terms of their generative AI capability, right? And they've taken the world by storm. They've kind of triggered this competition with Google and others. And now you're seeing, billions of dollars pouring into generative AI. I was reading, within the venture community. And you can also see the impact on NVIDIA, right, which makes the graphical processor units, the GPUs, which are required for doing AI. Their stock has just shot up, it became $1 trillion valuation and so on. So clearly, what OpenAI is doing is kind of setting the path for several others to follow. In that sense, it's a leadership position. So if there is, any kind of collaboration, it would be that, to benefit from that position. At the same time, I think it is important for us to also take a very India-centric view, because what OpenAI has created, may not necessarily reflect the realities of India, Indian languages, Indian content, Indian cultural context from a generative AI standpoint. And I think that's very important that our indigenous efforts at creating a large language model from an India point of view, I think is very important, and I don't think we should lose sight of that. But along the way, if we can learn, from the leader there, I think definitely the nation can benefit. Let's also not forget that the initial founders or contributors to OpenAI also included Infosys Technologies at that time. Of course, later on, OpenAI went on to become a for-profit organization, changing their entire personality. So this is not new, and clearly most of the talent in the AI space is from India, be it in Silicon Valley, be it here in India. So he knows that India is a very important country, and as you rightly alluded to that, there's this whole talk around regulations, and clearly what India does will have a bearing on the rest of the world as well, from an AI regulation standpoint.
Okay. Amit, since you've documented again AI and the successes around AI in your documentaries, let me put it out there for the viewers, because those documentaries are also available to be watched on Newsline Plus. You can download the app and watch our documentaries around the success and the perils of AI. But AI particularly, from a point of view of where we are at the moment, when compared to the rest of the world, we often talk about potential of AI, but I want to understand from you, for a person who's watching our program at this point in time, where does India stand as far as development in artificial space is concerned?
Okay, so this meeting between Sam Altman and Mr. Modi, I see it as India stands to gain more.
Okay.
We are lagging far behind. Right now, even Europe is not in the picture. There are only two protagonists, US and China. And in that race, China is ahead even of the US. In January, they introduced their first quantum computer commercially, 24 qubit. So they are that far ahead. India is playing catch up. And that's where I see that India has more to gain. India is even looking at collaborations with companies that are ahead in this, Google, IBM, or Microsoft.
Are we looking at private collaborations, or are we looking at government collaborations?
I'm sure it will be both ways.
Okay.
I think because there's a lot of catch up we have to do. The amount of investment we are also doing is a fraction of what US and primarily China.
The government of US and China.
Yeah, are investing into AI. And AI has, along with quantum, has a lot of military potential, this technology. So that is why it becomes that much more important for the nation. Two, there is a point of disagreement between India and the US. Sam Altman, everybody knows the statements he made about the perils of AI. Elon Musk and Steve Wozniak gave a very startling statement that they said that AI research should stop for 6 months immediately. Everybody knows about that.
In fact,
whether it was a joke or whatever, but there was something startling about it.
In fact, Sam Altman in India, when asked whether he trusts responses from ChatGPT, he said that he doesn't trust it. He trusts it as a little lesser than all the other people in the world that he trusts. So in a sense, he's also saying that whatever ChatGPT tells you, to keep as the old adage goes, keep your powder dry. Be alert and be careful about what you read on ChatGPT.
What you read
Italy
on ChatGPT.
has put in place very strict regulations on AI.
And I want to come on regulation, because it's an entire debate around regulation. But let me quickly also bring in Mr. Vempati into the conversation. Mr. Vempati, as somebody who's been active in the AI space, I want to understand from you, it appears that various governments, and Chinese government particularly, and the US government, as Amit mentioned, is making strides. They're putting the money where the mouth is. They are trying to get that technology in place. What exactly is government doing, the Indian government? Where are we headed? And I want you to quickly, briefly, maybe also touch upon how private sector has leveraged opportunities around AI in the past 6 months or a quarter.
Sure. So let me answer your second part of your question first, right? In terms of how we've been leveraging AI, I don't think it's just past 6 months. We've been at AI, from an application standpoint for quite some time. And there are several startups, even the large enterprises in India, which have developed AI application capabilities across, various domains. What is perhaps new and interesting is the generative AI and what ChatGPT has done, and how this is getting incorporated within the space. So, for example, there is this very interesting application I came across the other day called Kisan GPT, which is looking at using generative AI from the standpoint of farming and the farm sector. All right. So there are interesting applications from a generative AI standpoint, but as you rightly pointed out, it's very important to understand, what generative AI is meant for and what is not meant for. Right. It is good for, for example, generating code, doing creative content. What it is perhaps not good for yet is because, on the factual side, where it can get things wrong. So clearly, we need to understand where it works and where it doesn't work, and build application. And I think the Indian startups are quite way ahead on that front. Coming to your first part of your question on what should governments, what are governments doing, and what should India be doing? If you look at in India, the regulatory space, I think we are still playing catch up, as was pointed out. We have the data protection bill, which is still in the consultation stage. There is the Digital India Act, which is yet to come out into the consultation, into the open domain. The Honorable Minister has been talking about his philosophy around regulating AI, where he is not in favor of AI-specific legislations yet. He is more comfortable within the mandate ambit of the data protection law. The Digital India Act have certain rules that will regulate and govern AI. I think that is the direction we'll probably head for the time being. But I think the most important question is, given the way in which these deep learning, large language models are trained, what is also important is for regulations to bring transparency in what training data sets have gone into, building these models. I think that's very important because that will, in a large part, influence, the kind of output these models generate. So there needs to be transparency, not just in terms of what the algorithms are doing, but perhaps also transparency in terms of the training data sets.
Okay, interesting. So there needs to be more transparency, and that automatically brings us into the conversation around transparency, around what is the data that is available out there, how much of it's been utilized to train your generative AI, and more specifically, where do the regulations kick in? Now, EU, we understand, is on its course to pass a regulation. In India specifically, NASSCOM has released a set of guidelines that researchers and developers can allude to when using AI. But what we are seeing and looking at right now is self-regulation. There is no means for regulation by the way of a government or a central agency like you mentioned, a United Nations for regulations on AI. That hasn't happened yet. But there are precedents coming in from the West on how to regulate AI finally, Krishna.
Yeah,
very important.
And what's interesting is that AI is the next panacea for technology. I know, much like what social media was probably a decade ago, and when social media erupted, there wasn't enough thought put into safeguards and guardrails and how to make sure this evolves in the right way without negative effects on society. What's interesting with artificial intelligence is that awareness seems to be right there right from the beginning. I mean, we're talking about artificial intelligence, blossoming just in the post-pandemic world, at the end of the pandemic and post that. And even as we speak, the guy who does that one app that has made artificial intelligence so popular among the en masse public, at least, which is ChatGPT, is in India discussing this and in fact wants to set up this international organization. So I think what is positive to understand here is that there is greater awareness of the fact that when there is a new technology that's there on the table, you have to be careful about how it's going to evolve in the future and how it could possibly have negative impact on society, isn't it, Amit? That awareness wasn't there with the previous iterations of breakthrough technology, if I may.
Yes, and the only reason why India is, the government is shy of regulating it stringently right now is they look at AI. I'm not talking about just generative AI. We are using India, like Mr. Vempati mentioned, is using open AI to develop other softwares. But the development of AI itself, we are lagging behind. And the government does not want, feels that a regulation will be an impediment to the influx of innovation and investment in this field right now. So their self-regulation, they have mooted it, they have given guidelines, but they have not come out with laws as such. There are laws, like Mr. Vempati again mentioned, which are pending, and they've been pending for some time. So I feel they are shy of basically regulating it right now, not to impediment investment and innovation in this field right now, because we are playing catch up.
That's interesting, but also as far as fears around AI is concerned, it's not just the data that is being fed in, but also the data that comes out of it. And we briefly touched on that, how little you should be placing trust or faith in what comes out of ChatGPT or any other generative AI for that matter. And let me come back to a very specific example of a case in US, which I think everybody who's listening to us would want to Google it and would get some wisdom out of it. A case that was prepared by a certain lawyer in the US, where they wanted ChatGPT, of course, to prepare the case for them, and it cited certain precedents that never existed. Essentially made up information.
Yep.
And made up information, and also caused a lot of damage to the reputation of that certain lawyer. And that is one such documented case that we know of. There could have been many more.
No.
There will be many more unless there is a stop to it as to how far you can use, how much you should trust.
In fact, there are a couple of more documented cases as well, apart from that one particular case, Shweta. So in that sense, it's become very clear that that hallucinatory aspect of artificial intelligence is really playing out in all its glory. There is that, say, fundamental flaw, character flaw, or if I may, in India they say, there is that spelling mistake. Yeah, as far as artificial intelligence is concerned, that, everything is fine, it's futuristic, it is the technology of the future, but it does have this capability to completely make up things. And how wonderful, isn't it? That piece of intelligence that's going to replace supposedly human intelligence makes up things just like human beings, Amit.
Yeah, and anybody who has used ChatGPT and played with it, it is an intoxicating technology. It answers any question that you put to it. And that is where this whole hallucination thing, because some of those answers, even human beings probably cannot answer. And the computer gives you some answers, which obviously are, you can imagine where they are coming from.
Absolutely. So, and then let me also bring in Mr. Vempati here. Mr. Vempati, it appears that you can use ChatGPT and you must use generative AI to your, to your advantage as and when needed, but you can't be trusting it with everything that it tells you, every information that it doles out to you. And if there is no trust, and there's absence of trust, then you go back to Google and then you re-verify everything, and that sort of in a sense undermines the importance of ChatGPT or any other platform that you're using. How do you work around that? It's a predicament for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Before I answer that, I just want to highlight one other thing which we probably missed out. One of the other reasons why Sam Altman met the Prime Minister, if you recall, India is also the chair of the presidency of the Global Partnership for AI. So that puts in context for this global regulatory framework that you're talking about, because it will probably come out within the umbrella or the ambit of this global partnership, which currently India has the presidency for. Now coming to your question, I think the thing that we are missing out is the deep learning models, these large language models, they are based on probabilistic approaches. So when the model is not able to find something with a very high degree of confidence, which is factual, it then speculates by looking at the most plausible alternative, right? And hence you see this phenomenon where it makes up things which are not accurate or factual or historical. So I think what is important is how you are using, what purpose you are using the generative AI for. You're using it to generate software code. You need to test, verify, make sure that code is doing what it is supposed to do. If you're using it to do creative content, write an essay, write a paper, write a speech, it will give you the flowery language. But you got to do the fact check. You got to do, your homework in terms of what facts are going into. Yeah, but if you're trying to use it to do historical research as a research tool, I think it needs a lot more layers of checks and balances before the output can be very reliably consumed. And I think that is where the role for plugins comes in. There's, I think, several plugins that are being developed, which look at these aspects. But it is getting better. I think that is the point that we are missing. Because as an early user of ChatGPT, and I've seen all the generations right down to the latest version, which has both the plugins and the ability to browse the internet using Bing, you can see that it has dramatically improved. So what is happening is these models are getting better because with all the usage, with all the feedback loop that is happening, the model is getting better and it's making fewer and fewer mistakes. So it's a matter of time, like what even I think Sam Altman also pointed out, that once you get to a chat, a GPT 10 or 11, the capabilities can be much more superior. But then the untold story in all of this is the amount of computing power. In fact, there is an estimate recently by one of the analysts in the semiconductor industry in terms of the large amounts of computing power that ChatGPT requires, which is why if you see in GPT-4, they restrict the number of messages to, I think, 20 or 25. because it is not, unlimited computing power. And if you want to, get the benefits of this kind of generative AI, which is much more factual, much more accurate, it is going to consume tons of data, and hence, very large computing power. And that is going to be the other side of the story, which we are not right now paying much attention to, because we are in that initial hype phase.
Okay. So, Mr. Vempati, when you say computing power, are you talking about the electricity that it utilizes? What exactly are we
The
referring
electricity,
to?
the CPU cycles, the amount of computing that is required
Right.
for the ChatGPT to give the kind of responses that you wanted.
So the carbon footprint, therefore, of technology that we really haven't gone into details, and that's extremely very interesting. So far we only talked about, and every time we talk about carbon footprint or the extensive cost of technology, we often allude to cryptocurrency, how the mining takes up hordes of energy, CPU storage, and the wastage, the electric wastage that goes into it. Interesting point there around wastage, around the power, and the downside of using too much of artificial intelligence, Amit, without strictly going through the cost to environment.
You can do a simple comparison. The people using cryptocurrencies and trading in it are much lesser than the people who can go on to ChatGPT. So you don't need to have cash in the bank to go on to ChatGPT to play with it. But for cryptocurrency, if you are trading in it, then you have to basically be of a certain net worth. So obviously the amount of usage of OpenAI is going to be much more, and it's going to increase with the development of technology, as pointed out. So yeah, so that is another thing that will become a subject of discussion and much debate in the times to come.
Okay.
It already is, Shweta.
It already is, and before I let you go, I want to get final comments from each of you. In precursor to this discussion, Amit, you pointed out the importance of India, because India and US had roundtable conferences around collaborations on AI. Where do we actually stand on a global map when we talk about AI? I know you said we are far behind and we're playing catch up, but we're playing catch up really quickly.
I'll tell you where we stand right now. Quickly, we could, because we have leapfrogged in terms of digital. India's stack is probably a path breaker globally. So
right.
We have, but as far as AI right now is concerned, China controls more than half the world's supply of 5G equipment. Supply. It is the same story. China controls more than half the world's market in the supply of AI equipment. China has 13 high technology, global leadership in 13 high technology products. So that's how far they are. The second, which is lagging behind China, is US. Then comes the European Union, and somewhere after that is India right now in market share of AI. We are playing catch up. It's not necessary that we have to invest to basically play catch up. One big innovation and that's enough. And that's Indians are good at that.
And in fact, Mr. Vempati, we are innovating very quickly, aren't we?
Well, we are, but I think it's important to understand where we are lagging and where we are, okay, right? If you look at AI space, 3 layers, right? There is the application layer, then there is the, the foundational models and the frameworks, and then of course the bottom layer, which is the hardware and the data centers and all the computing power. If you look at where we are doing okay, it's perhaps on the application layer, because that is something that we've been always traditionally good at. We can very quickly, develop application capabilities, leveraging technology that is out there. So on that layer, I'm not that worried. And in fact, I think the government is also coming up with an initiative. The minister has alluded to it in the past as well, the India AI program, where they plan to make public, massive data sets, which application developers can build apps around. So that's on the application side. Where we are lagging and where the biggest gap is on the other 2 layers, the foundational layer where the models operate, where the frameworks are built, and of course the hardware layer. And that is where I think the gap is significant, though as you would have seen in the press last week, the AI for Bharat initiative at IIT Madras, which is developing this Indian language model Bhashini. So they seem to have made some progress, but I think it's still a long way off. I don't think we are anywhere close to a ChatGPT kind of capability yet, but we will eventually get there. And I think that is one area where a lot of gap exists. But the biggest worrying gap to me is the bottom layer, because I think the core technology, the hardware, because that is where there is accelerated exponential innovation happening. You look at NVIDIA, you look at the Googles, the Metas, Amazon. They're all trying to build custom CPU, GPUs, which are designed for a certain kind of AI. So what you're seeing is that at the hardware level, things are being optimized, fine-tuned for a specific kind of AI, and that is a kind of advancement which we will find it very, very hard to catch up on, and that's a very significant competitive gap. So that is a big area of concern, and our semiconductor mission, as you know, is still
how do you expect,
kind of behind the curve.
So how do you expect private entities to quickly scale up on the hardware gap, on the foundational gap? Not so much, but on the hardware gap, how do you expect and where do you expect? Because every founder today, from a tech to a non-tech company, everybody is talking about AI, advancements in AI. You need to imbibe AI into your core functioning. How can you expect, and how soon should private entities, specifically if not government, invest into hardware?
Well, I think that requires a deep tech investment culture in India, which is kind of something that we've not had for a while now, because these are long gestation ventures where you invest. Like, look at even OpenAI for that matter, right? When they started off, they had no idea what's going to happen, so they had to take that risk for several years. So that is the kind of deep tech investment culture that you need, which is tolerant of risk, which places bets on deep technologies. Where the time horizon to make money is perhaps long, right? Unless that happens, and this requires massive investment. This is not small investment. You look at the hardware sector, semiconductors, building processors, and so on. You're talking several $1 billion, right? So you need to be able to place those kinds of bets, and I think that will require some deep pockets and the ability to take long-term risks. Because unless those two things happen, it will be very hard for India to catch up on this core technology.
Okay, and Krishna, it's not like we don't have deep pockets. We have some of the richest people in India, and we have deep pockets in tech as well. Deep tech prevalent in India. We're known for our tech prowess. We have people who are leaders in tech coming from India. So essentially, and alluding to what Mr. Vempati said, if we want to progress and we want to progress really quickly, there are two gaps. One is the foundational, other is the hardware gap. And hardware, investments can only be made by private sector players. Private sector, therefore, needs to really wake up and start investing. I mean, it's a sleeping elephant. We keep talking about how private sector is lagging behind in investment, and this is perhaps, it may give you returns in the long run. It's not going to give you returns in the short run, but it's worth the bet.
From my understanding, a lot of artificial intelligence is already part of the operations and processes of companies, big, small, and medium. I was just on a tour of the country across, meeting MSMEs from across the country, and from what I understand, AI is already part of some of the most innovative businesses, like a restaurant business uses AI. For the kind of bookings it gets, for the kind of dishes that are famous. So India is on its way, well on its way when it comes to integrating. Yes, when it comes to creating that new piece of breakthrough technology in the AI space, like a ChatGPT.
Or investing in buying that technology. I think that is what Mr. Vempati was saying.
Right. So what I'm trying to say is that India has the right skills in the ecosystem and the right kind of people, as you said, the education and the mindset to adopt AI and adopt AI in innovative ways. As far as the hardware gap is concerned, look, we as an economy are trying to make a lot of hardware right now, from semiconductor chips to batteries. We are trying to make a lot of hardware in which that's the one area where we don't have the kind of expertise to create hardware in that sense, to create parts in that sense. So I'd say that's a long-term game. But as far as creating AI hardware is concerned, I think that is still a long way to go. And I completely agree on that.
Absolutely, it's a very long way to go, and perhaps the only way forward, therefore, is for big tech companies in India, centered in India, coming from India, to start investing in AI development. And the development would need you to, of course, invest in hardware technology, purchase that hardware, ensure that you are creating large language models here in India, centered in India, made in India, and that of course is the hope. Mr. Vempati, always a pleasure listening to you, sir. Thanks very much for joining with your inputs on that story, as well as Amit, Ranjan, who continues to track AI, whether he likes it or not. That's his job, and he is doing wonders at that.